The man who built the DeLorean wasn't killed by bad sales, or bad timing, or bad luck. He was arrested holding $24 million in cocaine, on camera, smiling. This is the story of how a $175 million car company was always a front, and how the feds watched the whole thing fall apart from inside a briefcase. John Z. DeLorean, designer, visionary, former General Motors golden boy, is sitting across from an undercover DA operative on the table between them. 59 pounds of cocaine. Worth $24 million, DeLorean lifts a bag and smiles. It's better than gold, he says. The man who built a car out of stainless steel and dreams had just become the face of the largest celebrity drug sting in American history. So how does the most celebrated automotive entrepreneur of his generation end up in a hotel room with a cocaine empire? The answer starts 12 years earlier, and it starts with a car. In 1970, John Zachary DeLorean was the youngest division head in General Motors history. He ran Pontiac at 40, then Chevrolet. He was worth $2,005 million, personally, before he touched a single investor's dollar. He was telegenic, charming, married to model Christina Ferrari. The automotive press called him the next Henry Ford. He wore turtlenecks to board meetings. At GM, that was revolutionary. He had already designed the Pontiac GTO, the car that invented the American muscle car category. Car and Driver called it the most exciting vehicle of the decade. He wasn't just a car guy. He was a symbol, a proof of concept that American ingenuity still had teeth. The stakes were enormous. This wasn't a small bet on an eccentric inventor. Governments, banks, and thousands of workers were about to follow him off a cliff. He left GM in 1973. He said it was the bureaucracy. Some said they pushed him either way. He left with a reputation worth more than money. By 1975, he had founded the DeLorean Motor Company. The pitch was simple. One iconic futuristic sports car, stainless steel body gull-wing doors, ethical manufacturing. He called it the ethical car. Investors lined up. The British government pledged $54 million in grants and loans to build his factory in Dunmurry, Northern Ireland. Unemployment. There was 18%. DeLorean told them he'd hire 2,600 people. Margaret Thatcher's government approved the deal in 1978. It was a political lifeline disguised as an industrial investment. The DeLorean DMC-12 was supposed to retail at $12,000. It launched in 1981 at $25,000. That gap, $13,000, was the first crack in the wall. The cracks were there early. Painfully early. The factory was behind schedule from day one. Chapman, Colin Chapman, founder of Lotus Cars, hired to engineer the DMC-12, was already pulling money sideways. A company called GPD Services received $17.65 million from DeLorean project funds between 1978 and 1981. GPD was a shell. Chapman controlled it. DeLorean knew about it. British government auditors flagged irregularities in 1980. Their report was filed, then buried. Meanwhile, 2,600 workers in Dunmurry were assembling cars with parts that didn't fit together. Right. Quality control failures ran at nearly 40% on the first production run. Dealers complained within weeks of the first shipments. Consumer Reports rated the DMC-12 not acceptable. The car that was supposed to save everything was failing in the showroom. What the investors didn't know was that the money wasn't going into the car anymore. It was going somewhere else entirely. By early 1982, DeLorean Motor Company was hemorrhaging cash. The company had burned through its entire capital reserve. Monthly losses were running at $35 million. The British government had already pumped in over $77 million total. Nearly double the original commitment. Sales projections had called for 30,000 units in the first year. Actual sales in 1981, 7,583. In January 1982, the Thatcher government cut off funding. The receiver was called in on February 19, 1982. 10,600 jobs in Dunmurry evaporated in a week. The factory went silent. The workers who had trusted DeLorean's promise, in one of the most economically devastated regions in the United Kingdom, lost everything. DeLorean was in New York when it happened. He didn't call the factory. He was already working the phones on a different plan. A plan that involved a man named James Timothy Hoffman. James Hoffman was a convicted drug smuggler turned FBI informant. He had known DeLorean for years through a neighbor connection in California. In September 1982, Hoffman brought DeLorean a proposal $2 million invested into a cocaine shipment from Colombia. The return, enough cash to refinance the entire DeLorean Motor Company. DeLorean agreed. The logic, if you can call it that, was this. The company needed $17 million to reopen. Banks wouldn't touch him. governments had already walked. His personal fortune was nearly gone. In his mind, this was a bridge loan. One transaction. One rescue. What DeLorean didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that Hoffman was wearing a wire from the first conversation. Every meeting was recorded. Every phone call was logged. The FBI had been building the case for 6 weeks before DeLorean ever touched a bag. The sting moved fast. On October 19, 1982, DeLorean flew to Los Angeles for what he believed was the final transaction. He met Benedict Tisa, an undercover DA agent posing as a banker. The cocaine, 59 pounds, street value $24 million, was placed on a table. Cameras recorded everything. DeLorean was arrested the same night. The charges: conspiracy to distribute cocaine, possession, with intent to distribute. The arrest was front-page news by October 20th. The Wall Street Journal ran the headline, "DeLorean arrested in drug sting." His wife Christina watched it on television. The DMC-12, a car that had already appeared in Back to the Future in pre-production, was now the car built by a man in handcuffs, and DeLorean hadn't even been indicted yet. The worst part of the legal story was still coming. The criminal trial began in April 1984. The prosecution had video. They had audio. They had 59 pounds of cocaine on a table. It looked airtight, but DeLorean's defense attorney, Howard Weitzman, made one argument: entrapment. The government, Weitzman argued, had invented a crime. Hoffman, a man with 2 prior drug convictions who was being paid by the FBI, had approached DeLorean, not the other way around. The FBI had created the desperation. They had exploited a man at his lowest point. On August 16, 1984, the jury acquitted DeLorean on all 8 counts. The courtroom erupted. Federal prosecutors stood in silence. The government had spent 2 years and millions of dollars. They got nothing. But the acquittal on the drug charges didn't touch the fraud case. And the fraud case was a different story entirely. The British fraud investigation had been running parallel the entire time. In 1984, the Department of Trade and Industry concluded that DeLorean and Colin Chapman had diverted $8.9 million of British government funds into personal accounts through the GPD Shell Company scheme. Chapman died of a heart attack in December 1982, 3 weeks after DeLorean's drug arrest. Convenient timing. The fraud charges against DeLorean in the UK went forward without Chapman. In 1986, after years of legal maneuvering across 2 countries, DeLorean settled civil claims with the British government. He paid nothing. He had nothing left. His personal assets had been liquidated. His estate in New Jersey was sold. Christina Ferrari filed for divorce in 1985. The man who had once run a $175 million company was effectively bankrupt. He spent the rest of his life in various failed business ventures, chasing the next reinvention. The workers in Dunmurry never recovered. The factory employed 2,600 people in 1981. By 1983, the building had been sold to a logistics company. The local unemployment rate climbed back above 20%. No reparations, no restitution. The British government eventually recovered 16 million of the 77 million it had invested, less than 21 cents on every pound. Approximately 8,583 DMC-12s were ever built. They now sell at auction for between $35,000 and $60,000 each. The car is worth more dead than it ever was alive. James Hoffman, the FBI informant who triggered the sting, received a reduced sentence on his prior charges and entered witness protection. John Z. DeLorean died on March 19, 2005, in Summit, New Jersey, from a stroke. He was 80 years old. He never built another car. Here is the pattern that nobody talks about. It isn't about cocaine. It isn't even about fraud. It's about what happens when a person's identity and their company become the same thing. DeLorean couldn't let the company die, because the company was him. Every bad decision, every diverted fund, every desperate gamble was made in service of one idea: that John DeLorean was a man who built great things. When the evidence said otherwise, he ignored it. Then he buried it. Then he bet a cocaine deal on it. This pattern, found identity fused to company survival, appears in Theranos, in Enron, in FTX. The product stops mattering. Survival becomes the mission. And once survival becomes the mission, any action can be justified. The auditors saw it. The British government saw it. The dealers saw it in the quality reports. Everyone saw it, except the one man who could have stopped it. That is not coincidence. That is a system, and it will happen again. Next week, Theranos. how Elizabeth Holmes convinced the entire American medical establishment that a machine the size of a toaster could run 200 blood tests from a single drop of blood, and why it took a 91-year-old Wall Street Journal reporter to be the only person in America willing to say it was impossible. Subscribe. You'll want to see this one.